Hello. In this video, I'm going to talk about rhubarb, which is currently in season locally in central PA. For the past several weeks, I've been able to get locally grown rhubarb at the farmers market, so you should be seeing it as well, possibly in the grocery stores if they have local produce, or at the very least at the farmers markets. In this video, I'm going to talk about some general ways to pick and store your rhubarb and offer a couple of recipes that might be good for canning or freezing or just to have in your fridge during this particular season. They might even be nice to have for Memorial Day if you want to have some condiments to serve with your food, something different to try. So you can follow along if you'd like and just get some ideas. If you want to make the recipe I'm making today, I am making jam and I will let you know what you'll need for that. One thing to think about with rhubarb, if you are pulling it from your garden or if you're getting some from the farmer's market or the grocery store, is the color. Both red and green is perfectly ripe, but it can be good to know that when rhubarb has more red to it, like this piece does, it is probably going to be a bit sweeter, but when it's very green, it's probably going to be a bit more tart. So that can make a difference as far as the recipes you're making and how sweet or tart you like your dishes to be. And I will talk about ways that you can adjust sweeteners and other seasonings in these recipes if you think about what kind of rhubarb you have and what you like to eat. Another thing to think about is storage. When you get your rhubarb, you don't want to wash it right away. If you're getting it and it has some dirt on it, you can brush that off and maybe cut the very ends off if those haven't already been cut. But otherwise, store it unwashed in the fridge in a plastic bag in the crisper drawer. And you want to use it or freeze it within 5 to 7 days. You can freeze it raw. You don't need to do anything to it other than I would recommend washing it and rinsing it at that point. And you may need to cut it into smaller pieces so that it'll fit into your containers in your freezer. Might maybe cut it into some smaller stalks, but you don't necessarily need to go ahead and slice it if you don't know what you're going to be using it for. And the more you slice, the more likely it is that it will be exposed to freezer burn if you have issues with that in your freezer at all. But it'll store in the freezer for up to a year depending on how well it's stored. Another thing to think about is how to wash it. Rhubarb, it was hard for me to find some information on rhubarb as far as pesticides when they do, if you're aware of the Dirty Dozen list that is produced every year where they test for the amount of pesticides on produce, and they let you know as a consumer which produce is more likely to retain and which ones they found the most pesticide residues on, even after washing. Rhubarb isn't on that list, even on the more extended list. So even in trying to find some additional information, most of the information I was finding had to do with the leaves, which we don't generally eat anyway, because all leafy greens are bad for retaining the pesticides. So I'm honestly not sure how much pesticides you're going to find in your rhubarb. So a good rule of thumb that I follow is that if I'm using any produce that I know is organic, or even if it's not certified, but I know it's been grown without pesticides, I will just soak it for a few minutes in a solution of 50-50 vinegar and cold water, and then rinse it for 20 seconds. But if I'm not sure if it's been grown with pesticides, I let it soak for 20 minutes. 20 minutes does not remove all of the pesticides, as I've said before in other videos, but it does help and give the vinegar time to lift more of those pesticides. And again, rinse them for 20 seconds and then let it drain and it'll be ready to go. Those are all of the tips that I have just in general for handling rhubarb. So now I'm going to share a couple of recipes and I will make one of those recipes. If you want to make jam with this video today and follow along, then you're going to need some rhubarb, some honey, maple syrup, or molasses, or you might use agave or brown rice syrup, some kind of sweetener. You could do without, but you probably are going to want with rhubarb because all rhubarb is fairly tart, even the sweeter varieties that have a lot of red. You'll want some vanilla. You could potentially omit it, or you could use a different flavor enhancer like almond, for example, but vanilla is what I'll be using. And then depending on how tart you like things, if you have green rhubarb, you might want to just omit any lemon juice or orange juice altogether. If you have red rhubarb and you'd like a little bit more tartness, you could add some lemon juice or orange juice, or you could skip that altogether because rhubarb is already fairly tart. And then I recommend some cinnamon for flavor, or you could use a similar spice like nutmeg or ginger if you prefer. Probably reduce it if you're doing some nutmeg because you don't need as much, but you could substitute a teaspoon of ginger if you prefer. Or you could just omit those altogether if you want to just do the fruit and the sweetener. So you can go ahead and gather those ingredients. If you don't have that much rhubarb, I actually need to slice up my rhubarb. And once I see exactly how much I have, I will adjust the amounts accordingly. But I probably have approximately 4 cups of rhubarb today. If you only have a couple of cups because you only have maybe a couple of stalks that you can slice up right now, you can always cut this recipe in half. Or if you have a lot more, obviously you can go and double the recipe if you need to. So go ahead and pause the video if you're going to make this, or you can just follow along and take some notes if you'd like to make it later. So I just cut up 2 fairly large stalks of rhubarb and 1 smaller thin stalk, and that yielded 2 cups here. And I've decided I'm going to do half of the recipe because I'd like to use the rest of the rhubarb that I have right now for something else. So if you think in terms of how much rhubarb you want, 2 pretty decent sized stalks when I made the chutney the other day yielded 2 cups for me. The 1 stalk that I had was a little bit smaller today, I think, and then the other one was much smaller. So 3 stalks equaled the same as 2 very large stalks, and both yielded 2 cups. So if you'd like to make this jam, I'm ready to start cooking everything. I'm going to put all of these ingredients, half of them, into probably a medium-sized saucepan since I'm only doing half the recipe, and I will bring it to a simmer on medium, and I'm going to let it cook for about 15 to 20 minutes until it's thickened. So you could go ahead and do the same, and I will show you when my sauce is as thick as it needs to be, what it will look like when it's ready to be removed from the heat. So I've mixed half of everything, except I only did 1/3 of a cup of honey to start. I don't like things to be super sweet, and since the rhubarb I'm using is fairly red, I'm going to start there and see how it goes. I may need to increase it a bit, but obviously you can always add some sweetener, but you can't take it out. And I'm going to let that simmer now for a while. And I'll show you then what it looks like when it's ready to be removed from the heat. The jam has been cooking for almost 10 minutes now, so you can see how much the rhubarb has already broken up. It should pretty much be broken up completely by the time it's done cooking. So this is what my jam looks like after about 20 minutes. There are still very tiny pieces of rhubarb in there, but I like just a little bit of that in my jam. If you really want it to break up completely, you could let it go longer because it will eventually do that. You could even stop it at about 15 minutes when you've got some pieces yet. And if you do want a chunkier jam, you could always slice your rhubarb a little bit thicker. I like to slice it thin. Slicing it thinner for this and for the chutney will help it to get really soft and break up. And then the tartness of the rhubarb really helps to enhance the flavor. of both of these. That's one thing to keep in mind when you're doing any kind of cooking, really, is anything that's actually providing some kind of flavor, like onion or garlic or ginger. The more you chop it up or mince it up, the more of the flavor will release into whatever it is you're cooking, because more surface area of that produce is going to be in contact with the sauce and other things that are providing flavor to the dish that you're making. I did end up adding a couple more tablespoons of honey because it was still pretty tart at 1/3 of a cup for a half a recipe, but I didn't even end up with a full half cup. So you might want to start light and add depending on how sweet you like your jams. I like my things to be tart, and this kind of has that tartness of like when you have a really tart variety of apple that you're using to make applesauce or a pie. It's a similar kind of flavor with the cinnamon and the sweetener and the tartness of the produce. So I will let that cool completely because I'm not going to freeze or can any of this. I'm just going to put it into the refrigerator. I don't eat a lot of jam. I like it a little bit once in a while as a special treat. And there are more fruits coming up with the summer season, so I'll probably be making other kinds of fruit jams in the next month or so. So I'm just making a little bit here. I will make some more chutney actually because I really like the chutney and I tend to eat more savory foods. If you don't know what a chutney is, this is something that is popular in Indian cuisine, and it's like a savory jam, basically. If you make the chutney and you make the jam, you're going to find that they look very similar. The aromas will be slightly different because the chutney has more spices and flavor ingredients in it than the jam does. Jam is much more straightforward and basic. But they both take about the same amount of time, other than just maybe having to prep a few more ingredients for the chutney. And the chutney does cook just a little bit longer unless you don't want it to be almost smooth. But the longer you let it cook, the more the flavors come through. And in Indian cuisine, they serve this as a dipping sauce. They serve it with a lot of different things, and I'll make some suggestions of what you can do if you want to make the chutney at the end of this video in a couple of minutes. I'm not going to make the chutney right now, but I am going to share the recipe. It's very similar to making the jam because, again, you put all of the ingredients in the pot and simmer over medium, but this time you'll let it cook for more like 30 minutes. And then you can go ahead and do the same thing you would do. You can can it, or you can refrigerate it, or you can freeze it. The main difference here is that there is less sweetener in it. As I said, it's more of a savory. Many of the chutneys in Indian cuisine are actually made with fruits because fruits tend to be sweet, and then they add different kinds of spices, and the sweetness and even some of the tartness of the fruit, like a mango, for example, will help to complement the spices. And rhubarb is nice for that as well because it's got the tartness. And so you maybe do add a little bit of sweetener with the rhubarb chutney that you wouldn't necessarily add with like a mango chutney, but you're going to get a similar kind of flavor. So if you like this, you can go looking for other chutney recipes and try them, because these are nice to have. Great in the summertime because if you're doing grilling, you can serve it cold as like an appetizer or just something to snack on with some raw vegetables, or if you're grilling some vegetables and meat, you can serve it with those as a dipping sauce. You could even glaze these veggies and meat if you wanted to with a chutney if you make enough of it. I like to just have it on the side and dip different things in it. So if you want to make that, here's the recipe, and you can try different things. If you like different kinds of seasonings, you can use some chili flakes to make it a bit hot, or you can omit those, or you can just add a little black pepper. I do recommend some kind of pepper because that will help to give the flavor some complexity. But you don't have to go for chili flakes if you don't like a lot of heat. Just a dash of black pepper is enough. And if you like, you could add some allspice or some nutmeg, but you don't need to. So this is the chutney I made the other day. As you can see, it's pretty thick. It will spread or spoon. So you can put it on a lot of things if you want. It would stay on a meat if you wanted to glaze it, or a vegetable if you wanted to glaze them for roasting or for grilling. Or you can, like I said, serve it on the side as a dipping sauce, or you can spread it like a jam onto different things. So both of these recipes are easy. You don't need to do a lot of prep work, a little bit of washing and chopping, but not a lot. And you don't have to turn on the oven, it's getting warm. You can do this on the stovetop. You can make it ahead of time because they'll both last for a while if you want to make these ahead for something like Memorial Day or another time that you're going to be grilling or having a nice meal. These are available, or you can just have it in your fridge for snacking. It's nice now with lots of fresh vegetables and produce coming into season. You could dip different things in it. You could dip apples if you wanted to, if you like that kind of thing, carrots, celery, anything at all, especially with the chutney. And you can use a chutney like a jam if you'd like, if you just like savory things. I just had some on bread earlier today, like I would eat a jam, and it was really good. It's just not as sweet. Like I said, I don't eat as many sweet things like jam, so the chutney is more the kind of thing I'll keep more of in my fridge. I hope that these recipes are helpful. I hope you're able to enjoy some rhubarb while it's in season, whether it's something that you eat all the time or it's something that you're trying for the first time. Thanks, and I will see you next time for the next video.